What are you most proud of, Joni? What do you look back and go, that is what I'm really proud of?
You know, there are cases, man, in the street where people come up that it's really meant a lot to them. Like, for instance, what first comes to mind here is two young girls who lost their mother in their early teens who holed up in their bedroom with this music.
For decades, Joni Mitchell has captivated the world with her voice and timeless songs, but behind the fame lay a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a past more haunting than anyone imagined. Now, at 81, she has finally revealed her darkest secrets, a truth she never dared to share. Join us as we uncover Joni's shocking revelation about her past. Joni Mitchell was born Roberta Joan Anderson on November 7, 1943, in Fort Macleod, Alberta. Her mother worked as a teacher, while her father served as a Royal Canadian Air Force flight lieutenant. His role involved training new pilots at RCAF Station Fort Macleod during World War II. Because of her father's military career, the family frequently moved to different bases across Western Canada. When the war ended, he left the Air Force and became a grocer. The Andersons eventually settled in Saskatchewan. At the age of 9, her world changed drastically. She woke up one morning, unable to move. Polio had taken hold of her, forcing her into weeks of hospitalization. Separated from her parents, she was transported from her town to a city clinic where she not only had to fight the disease, but also face the reality of losing her life. Her condition was severe, and the chances of regaining her mobility were uncertain, yet she refused to accept defeat. With determination, she worked her way back, step by step, until she was able to stand and walk again. This triumph over adversity would define her spirit for the rest of her life. During her time in the hospital, surrounded by other children battling illness, she found solace in music. She sang for them, lifting their spirits, and, in the process, discovered her own love for performing. Around this same age, she picked up another lifelong habit, smoking. But she has always insisted that it never affected her voice. By the age of 11, her family had moved again, this time to Saskatoon, the place she would forever consider her true hometown. School was a struggle, and academic subjects never held her interest. Instead, she was drawn to painting, an early passion that remained close to her heart. Briefly, she studied classical piano but didn't stick with it. As she grew older, she considered pursuing a career in either music or dance. One teacher, Arthur Kratzman, stood out during her school years. Unlike others, he encouraged her to express herself through writing. This influence stayed with her, and when she released her first album, she honored him with a dedication. She spent time downtown with a rough crowd, but after realizing she was getting too close to dangerous situations, she pulled herself away. Then, music began to take on an even greater role in her life. Joni wanted to learn the guitar, but her mother disapproved, associating it with country music. Not wanting to give up, she settled for a ukulele instead. Eventually, she taught herself guitar, using a Pete Seeger songbook as a guide. However, her struggle with polio had left its mark. Her left hand was weakened, forcing her to develop alternate tunings. This challenge became a creative breakthrough, leading her to craft a unique method in harmony and song structure. She began performing at bonfires near Waskesiu Lake, singing with friends. By 18, she was expanding her musical influences, drawing inspiration from artists like Edith Piaf and Miles Davis. Her first paid performance took place on October 31, 1962, at a Saskatoon club that hosted folk and jazz musicians. Though she wasn't performing jazz at the time, she was deeply drawn to it. After finishing high school at Aidan Bowman Collegiate, she took art classes at the Saskatoon Technical Collegiate under abstract expressionist painter Henry Bonley. Then, in the 1963 to 1964 school year, she left home to attend the Alberta College of Art in Calgary. However, her experience there left her blank. The emphasis on technical skill over creativity felt limiting. After a year, she left school. Meanwhile, the reason was far more personal than artistic dissatisfaction. At 20 years old in 1964, Joni told her mother about her plans to become a folk singer in Toronto. Leaving Western Canada for the first time, she took a train eastward to Ontario. During the 3-day journey, she wrote her first song, Day After Day. She made a stop at the Mariposa Folk Festival, where she watched Buffy Sainte-Marie perform. 1 year later, she returned to Mariposa, this time as a performer in front of a large audience. Over the years, Sainte Marie would eventually cover one of her songs. Without the $200 required for musicians' union fees, she found herself performing wherever she could. But most of her performances took place in unusual venues, places that did not require union membership. She was turned away from the established folk clubs, forcing her to rely on busking to make ends meet. To afford rent, she took a job in the women's wear department of a downtown store. Her modest living space was a room in a boarding house, right across the hall from poet Duke Redbird. As she became more involved in the folk scene, she observed an unwritten rule among folk singers. In each city, certain performers claimed ownership over specific traditional songs, even if they had not written them. She encountered resistance when attempting to sing well-known folk songs, being told that she was not allowed to perform them. This exclusivity conflicted with her belief that folk music should be shared freely. In order to create something of her own, she decided to write her own songs. At the time, Joni was pregnant. The father was her former boyfriend from Calgary, Brad McMath. In high school, she had been the last of her friends to remain inexperienced in relationships. Curious about what she had been missing, she started seeing Brad. He was tall, blonde, and good-looking. Neither of them had been searching for love, yet they found themselves in an unexpected situation. As soon as she learned she was pregnant, she left for Toronto under the pretense of pursuing music. In reality, she also wanted to conceal her pregnancy from her family. Life in the city proved to be harsh. Some rise to the challenge of responsibility, but Brad was not one of them. His reaction to the news was devastating. Instead of staying, he abandoned her, disappearing from her life completely. She was left alone, 3 months pregnant, in a small attic room with no money. The only source of heat was a fireplace, and winter was approaching. She struggled to take care of herself, let alone prepare for a baby. With every passing day, the weight of her circumstances became heavier. She tried to picture a future where she could provide for her child, but all she saw was hardship. Despite her hopes of finding a way to keep the baby, she ultimately made a painful choice. After giving birth to a daughter, Kelly Dale Anderson, she placed her in foster care. Having felt abandoned herself, she carried deep sorrow over this decision. Still, she clung to the idea that she could eventually build a better life and reunite with her child. Not long after, an opportunity presented itself. She began working at the Penny Farthing, a folk club in Toronto. There, she met Chuck Mitchell, an American folk singer from Michigan. He admired her talent and assured her he could help her find work in American coffeehouses. More than that, he seemed to offer a solution to her problem. She believed that if she built a life with him, she could earn enough to bring her daughter home. The plan was simple: move to Detroit, perform together, and save money. When the time was right, they would return for Kelly. At first, she focused on the future, believing she had made the right decision, but cracks soon appeared in their marriage. She was youthful, artistic, and deeply creative. Chuck, in contrast, was older, well-educated, practical, and had connections to the folk music circuit in the United States. At the start, their differences did not seem important. She viewed the marriage as a necessary step toward her true goal. However, the reality of their relationship soon became difficult to ignore. Chuck's dismissive attitude toward her music stung. She once eagerly played him a song she had written, "Both Sides Now." Instead of appreciating it, he belittled her efforts. Years later, that song would be recognized as one of the greatest ever written. His attitude masked something deeper. He knew she was more talented than him. He dealt with that fact by diminishing her accomplishments. She tolerated it for a while, but resentment began to build. Through it all, one thought never left her mind: Kelly. She imagined the day she would finally be able to bring her daughter home. Although that day finally arrived, nothing went as planned. She and Chuck visited the foster home where Kelly had been placed, but instead of reclaiming her child, she made a painful decision. She signed the papers that would legally relinquish her parental rights. Before leaving, she left behind a single note in Kelly's file, stating that her mother had gone to the United States to pursue a career in music. Now there was nothing left to do but move forward. In April 1965, Joni left Canada for the first time. She traveled with Chuck Joni to the United States, where they began performing music as a duo. A few months later, in June, the two were married in Chuck's hometown, and Joni adopted his surname. She threw herself into her music, though it no longer served as an escape. If anything, It became a way to process her pain, and the burden of her past never faded. For much of her career, Mitchell kept the loss of her daughter private, though she referenced it in several songs. One early example is Little Green, which she performed in the 1960s. Another reference appears in Chinese Cafe from her 1982 album Wild Things Run Fast, where she sang about how her friends' children are growing up well, while her own child remains a stranger she gave birth to but couldn't raise. However, things were about to take a different turn. Joni and Chuck's marriage and musical collaboration did not last long. By early 1967, the couple divorced, and Joni relocated to New York City to focus on her career as a solo artist.
That's my cross to bear, and that's probably the main thrust of my work, and the main pain that I suffer as a human being, you know, more than the loss of a boyfriend or anything.
She played at various venues along the East Coast, performing in cities such as Philadelphia, Boston, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Her appearances in folk clubs and coffee houses became more frequent, and as she began composing her own songs, her unique style set her apart. During this period, her songwriting ability and guitar techniques gained recognition, gradually earning her a reputation in the folk music scene. Folk singer Tom Rush, who had first encountered Joni in Toronto, was captivated by her talent. He introduced one of her songs, Urge for Going, to Judy Collins, but she declined to record it. Instead, Rush decided to record it himself. The song then caught the attention of country artist George Hamilton IV, who transformed it into a country hit. In 1967, while performing at Gaslight South, a club in Coconut Grove, Florida, Joni's talent caught the attention of David Crosby. Impressed by her voice and songwriting, he invited her to Los Angeles to introduce her music to his circle. There, she met Elliot Roberts, a manager who had been encouraged by Buffy Sainte-Marie to see her perform in a Greenwich Village coffee house. He soon became her manager, working closely with David Geffen, another influential figure in the music industry. Under their guidance, Joni secured a contract with Reprise Records through talent scout Andy Wickham. Crosby, eager to preserve her raw and intimate sound, persuaded Reprise to let her record an acoustic album without the folk rock embellishments popular at the time. As a result, in March 1968, her debut album was released under the title Song to a Seagull, with Crosby earning a producer credit. To support the album, Joni embarked on an extensive tour. Her growing presence in the folk music world heightened anticipation for her second release. In April 1969, Clouds arrived, featuring her own versions of songs that had already been popularized by other artists, including Chelsea Morning, Both Sides Now, and Tin Angel. The album also showcased her artistic abilities, with the cover designed and painted by Joni herself, a practice she continued throughout her career. The following year brought further recognition. In March 1970, Clouds won her first Grammy Award for Best Folk Performance. A month later, she released her third album, Ladies of the Canyon, marking a shift in her musical direction. Moving beyond purely acoustic folk, she embraced more elaborate arrangements, incorporating overdubs, percussion, and vocal harmonies. Her songwriting also evolved, with many tracks composed on the piano. Among the standout songs was her rendition of Woodstock, performed solo on a Wurlitzer electric piano. Slower and more introspective than Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young's version, it offered a different emotional perspective on the famous festival. The album also featured The Circle Game and Big Yellow Taxi, an environmentally conscious song that included the now famous line about paving paradise. Ladies of the Canyon quickly gained popularity, receiving extensive airplay on FM radio and achieving gold certification for selling over 500,000 copies. At the peak of her success, Joni decided to take a break from touring to focus on writing and painting. Despite her absence from the stage, she was still recognized as Melody Maker's top female performer for 1970. That same year, she provided backup vocals on You've Got a Friend for James Taylor's album Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon. In June 1971, she released Blue, an album that delved deeper into personal themes than ever before. Critics and audiences responded immediately, and it climbed into the top 20 on the United States Billboard charts while reaching the top 3 in the United Kingdom. The album's lead single, Carrie, was heavily produced compared to the rest of the record, but most tracks relied on simpler arrangements that highlighted Joni's voice and emotions. The album revealed a fragility that resonated deeply with listeners. However, her heartbreak was far from over. Joni never sought out complicated relationships, but they always seemed to find her. She preferred to keep things simple. Still, she found herself entangled in a romance that was anything but sweet. This time, it was with John Guerin, a percussionist who quickly became both her musical collaborator and romantic partner. Their connection deepened as they toured together, merging their professional and personal lives into something intense and volatile. It was a dangerous mix, and soon enough, the cracks began to show. John's jealousy surfaced when he saw Joni maintaining friendships with her exes. His suspicions boiled over one evening when he found her talking with an ex-lover. He barged in, convinced he had just caught her in an unforgivable act. The pain of perceived betrayal pushed him toward a vengeful response. He wasted no time finding another woman, flaunting her in front of Joni in a deliberate attempt to hurt her. But this cruelty wasn't the worst of it. Their musical commitments forced Joni to endure the torment of seeing John and his new companion every day. The emotional strain grew unbearable. Trapped on the road together, the tension reached a breaking point. Joni couldn't escape, and the pressure mounted until it became too much. A breakdown was inevitable. The tour collapsed, leaving her no choice but to step back. As always, she found solace in her music, channeling her pain into new songs. By 1982, Joni was making bold changes. Musically, she explored new sounds, and personally, she took a leap of faith with Larry Klein, a bassist 13 years younger. Their collaboration extended beyond music, leading to marriage that same year. At 42, Joni found herself expecting a child 3 years into their union, but joy turned to tragedy as she refused to let go of self-destructive habits. Despite the pregnancy, she continued smoking heavily, drinking, and ignoring precautions that could have protected her health. The consequences were devastating. She suffered a painful miscarriage, both physically and emotionally. The loss strained her marriage, and with tensions rising over creative disputes, financial burdens, and personal struggles, the foundation of their relationship began to crack. Larry reached his limit and gave her an ultimatum. They both needed to change if they were going to make things work. But Joni stood firm. She wasn't about to change, and with that, the marriage came to an end. In 1993, the past came crashing back into her life. For decades, Joni had kept a painful secret, the existence of the daughter she had given up for adoption. But that secret was exposed when an old roommate sold the story to a tabloid. The headlines forced Joni to confront the truth she had buried for years. Though it was a painful betrayal, it also gave her an opportunity to finally search for her daughter openly. Unknown to her, fate had already set things in motion. Her daughter, renamed Kaloran Gibb, had also begun looking for her birth parents. Their long-awaited reunion happened in 1997. Meeting Kaloran brought Joni a sense of closure, but it also changed her. She admitted that her passion for songwriting faded after reconnecting with her daughter. For years, she had poured her emotions into music, but now the source of so much of her inspiration had been confronted. It seemed like she had found what she had been missing, but happy endings aren't always guaranteed. Kaloran carried her own burdens, personal struggles, financial troubles, and deep-seated family wounds. History seemed to repeat itself as mother and daughter found themselves caught in cycles of conflict. Their relationship, once hopeful, became riddled with tension. One argument led to another until, in 2000, things went too far. A heated dispute spiraled out of control, and Kaloran took the matter to the police, reporting that Joni had slapped her. That moment shattered whatever fragile peace remained between them. The bond they had worked so hard to rebuild collapsed. Once again, Joni lost her daughter, and this time, the silence between them stretched for years. It seemed as though their relationship had been permanently severed. But even after all the pain, there was still hope. Slowly, they began to reconnect. Of all the complicated relationships Joni had navigated, this one might have been the hardest, but it was also the one that mattered the most.
Because my life was full of questions. When are they going to drop the big one? Where's my daughter? You know, like, there were so many unresolved things in me that those chords...
Fast forward 2009, Joni revealed that she had morgellons, a controversial skin condition. She expressed a desire to step away from the music industry to focus on raising awareness and advocating for those affected by it. Despite her career being deeply rooted in music, she appeared determined to dedicate her energy to supporting those who shared her struggle. The following year, during an interview she made a remark about Bob Dylan that caused widespread controversy. Having worked with him in the past, her statement labeling him as insincere and unoriginal spread rapidly through various media outlets. While she did not expand on her comment, many speculated it was linked to allegations of plagiarism tied to his 2006 album Modern Times. When asked about the incident in a 2013 interview, she denied making the remark, but acknowledged broader concerns regarding artistic originality, including allegations of borrowed lyrics from Dylan's 2001 album Love and Theft. Though Joni had stated she would no longer tour or perform live, she continued making public appearances, particularly to discuss environmental issues. She divided her time between her home in Los Angeles and her secluded 80-acre property in Secolt, British Columbia, which she had owned since the early 1970s. Since 2011, she has shifted her focus primarily to visual art, choosing not to sell her work and only exhibiting it on rare occasions. In March 2015, Joni suffered a brain aneurysm rupture, which left her in need of extensive physical therapy and daily rehabilitation. Her recovery process was challenging, and for a time, details about her condition remained scarce. She made her first public appearance after the aneurysm in August 2016 at a Chick Corea concert in Los Angeles. Over the next few years, she was seen at select events, and by November 2018, David Crosby reported that she was working on regaining mobility. From 2018 onward, Joni became involved in several archival projects. That September, Both Sides Now, Live at the Isle of Wight Festival 1970, a documentary directed by Murray Lerner, was released. It included restored concert footage, along with unseen interviews. In November, she oversaw the release of an 8-LP vinyl reissue of Love Has Many Faces, a quartet, a ballet, Waiting to be Danced, followed by a limited edition blue vinyl version of Blue in early 2019. That same month, Joni attended a tribute event in Los Angeles for her 75th birthday, Joni 75. A birthday celebration featured performances by Brandi Carlile, Emmylou Harris, James Taylor, Chaka Khan, Graham Nash, Seal, Chris Christopherson, and other artists interpreting her songs. Diana Krall performed twice during the event. The tribute was later released on DVD and CD, with a special vinyl edition appearing for Record Store Day in April 2019. Another tribute concert, Songs Are Like Tattoos, took place later, where Brandi Carlile performed Blue in its entirety. In November 2018, Joni also approved the release of Joni, the Joni Mitchell Sessions, a collection of photographs taken by Norman Seeff. She revisited her written work with Morning Glory on the Vine, a compilation of handwritten lyrics, poetry, and artwork, originally created in 1971 as a private gift for close friends and family. The collection was finally made available to the public in October 2019 in both a standard hardcover edition and a limited signed version. By September 2020, Joni had collaborated with Rhino Records to launch Joni Mitchell Archives, a series of releases featuring material from her personal vault. The first volume, Joni Mitchell Archives, Volume 1, The Early Years, 1963 to 1967, came out in October 2020 as a 5-disc collection. In April 2022, the release won a Grammy for Best Historical Album, and Joni attended the ceremony in person to accept the award. That same day, select recordings from the box set were released as standalone vinyl albums titled Early Joni, 1963, and Live at Canterbury House, 1967. In July 2021, the Reprise albums, 1968 to 1971, was released, featuring remastered versions of her first 4 albums, Song to a Seagull, Clouds, Ladies of the Canyon, and Blue. For the first time, Song to a Seagull received a new mix, supervised by Joni herself. She was critical of the original mix, describing it as having a muffled quality that detracted from the music. In early 2022, Joni took a stand against the pandemic misinformation by demanding that Spotify remove her music. She did so in support of Neil Young, a longtime friend and fellow polio survivor, who had taken similar action against the platform's association with the Joe Rogan Experience, a podcast criticized for spreading false information about the pandemic. she expressed her concerns publicly, aligning herself with the scientific and medical communities. Many applauded her decision, with British doctor and author Rachel Clark noting that both Young and Joni had first-hand knowledge of the dangers misinformation could pose. On April 1st, 2022, Joni was honored as MusiCare's Person of the Year by the Recording Academy. She personally attended the event to accept the award, marking another milestone in her enduring legacy. Joni Mitchell's life is marked by pain, heartbreak, love, and triumph, and her legacy continues to endure for years to come. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen